Hi students, welcome to day 6 of our City of Ember Read Aloud. When we left off last time, Dune and Lena were figuring out more of the message, and they figured out a part about a rock marked with E, and Dune was remembering back to some of the rocks he had seen while he was working down in the pipeworks, and he remembered that some of them had what he had first thought were just squiggly patterns of lines on them, but now he's thinking maybe I should look closer. Maybe it wasn't just squiggly lines, maybe it actually had some writing on it, and so he's thinking those may be the rocks marked with E. So he thought of this during the night, so he's anxiously waiting till morning so he can go down into the pipeworks and see what he can figure out. So we're on chapter 14 called The Way Out. The next day was song rehearsal day. Everyone was let off from work at 12 o'clock to practice for the singing. It was a slow morning for messages. Lena had a lot of time to sit at her station in Garn Square and think. She put her elbows on her knees, rested her chin in her hands, and stared down at the pavement in front of the bench, which was worn smooth by the many feet that had passed there. She thought about the mayor down in his room full of plunder, gorging on peaches and asparagus, and wrapping his huge body in elegant new clothes. She thought of his great stack of light bulbs and shook her head in bewilderment. What was he thinking? If he still had light bulbs when everyone else in Ember had run out, would he enjoy sitting in his lit room while the rest of the city drowned in darkness? And when the power finally ran out for good, all his light bulbs would be useless. Possessions couldn't save him. How could he have forgotten that? He must be thinking the same way as Looper. Everything was hopeless now anyway, so he'd just live it up while he could. She leaned back against the bench, stretched her legs out, and took a long breath. Very soon the guards would storm into the secret room and seize the mayor as he sat stuffing himself on stolen goodies. Maybe they already had. Maybe today the stunning news would come. Mayor arrested, stealing from citizens. Maybe they'd announce it at the singing so everyone could hear it. No one came with any messages to be delivered, so after a while Lena left her station and found a step to sit on in an alley off Calloo Street. She pulled back her hair and braided it to keep it from sliding around. Then she took from her pocket the copy of the instructions she'd made just after she sent her note to the mayor. She unfolded it and began to study it. This is what she was doing when, a little before 12 o'clock, she looked up to see Dune running toward her. He must have come straight from the pipeworks. He had a big, damp patch of water on one leg of his pants. He spoke in an excited rush. "I've been looking all over for you," he said. "I found it." "Found what?" "The E. At least, it looks like an E. It must be an E, though you wouldn't know it if you weren't looking for it." "You mean the rock marked with an E in the pipeworks?" Yes, I found it." He stood breathing hard, his eyes blazing. "I'd seen it before, but I didn't think of it as an E then, just a squiggle that looked like writing. There are all these rocks that look like they're covered with writing." "Which rocks? Where is it?" Lena was on her feet now, bouncing with excitement. "Down at the west end of the river, near where it goes into that great hole in the pipeworks wall." He paused, trying to catch his breath. "And listen," he said, "we could go there right now." "Right now?" "Yes, because of rehearsals. Everyone's going home, so the pipeworks will be closed and empty." "But if it's closed, how will we get in?" Grinning, Dune produced a large key from his pocket. "I ducked into the office on my way out and borrowed the spare key," he said. "Lister, he's the pipeworks director, was in the bathroom practicing his singing. He won't miss the key today, and tomorrow everyone will be off work." He did an impatient shuffle. "So come on," he said. The town clock struck the first of its 12 noontime booms. Lena stuffed her copy of the instructions back in her pocket. "Let's go." The pipeworks was empty and silent. Lena and Dune went up the hallway past the rows of boots and slickers hanging on their hooks. They didn't take any of these for themselves. This was not a pipeworks tunnel they were about to enter, they were sure. It wouldn't be dripping with water or lined with spurting pipes. They went down the long stairway and out into the main tunnel where the river thundered alongside the path, its dark surface strewn with flecks of light. Dune led the way along the river's edge. As they neared the west end, Lena saw the rocky outcroppings Dune had described to her. They were strange, bulging shapes creased with lines like the faces of the very old. Not far beyond, Lena could see the place where the river disappeared into a great hole in the pipeworks wall. Dune knelt down beside the clump of stones. He ran a finger over their convoluted surface. "Look here," he said. Lena stooped down and peered at the deeply carved lines. It was hard to see the E at first because it was surrounded by such a tangle of other lines, and because she was expecting it to be an E drawn with straight strokes. But once she saw it, an E drawn with curving lines, a script E, which is like a cursive E, she was sure it had been carved on purpose. It was centered on its stone, and its lines were deep and even. "So, from here, we should look down at the river," said Dune. "That's what the instructions said. Down riverbank to ledge." He lay on his stomach next to the rock and inched forward until his head hung out over the edge of the path. Lena watched him anxiously. His elbows stuck up on either side of him, and his head bent down, was nearly invisible. He stayed that way for long seconds. Then he shouted, "Yes, I see something!" And he scrambled to his feet again. "You do it," he said. "Look at the riverbank right below us." Lena did as he had. She laid down and pulled herself forward until her head was over the edge. 8 feet or so below her, she saw the black, churning water go by. She tucked her chin in and looked at the riverbank. It was a sheer rock wall, straight up and down, and slick with spray. And at first, that was all she saw. But she kept looking, and before long could make out short iron bars bolted into the bank, one below the next, almost directly below her. They were like the rungs of a ladder. They were a ladder, she realized. The bars provided a way to climb down the riverbank. Not a very appealing way. The bars looked slippery, and the water below was so terribly fast. And because of the dimness and the flying spray, she couldn't actually see if there was a ledge at the bottom or not. But the E was clearly an E, and the bars were clearly a ladder. This must be the right place. "Who will go first?" said Dune. "You can," Lena said, getting to her feet and stepping away. "All right." Dune turned so that his back was to the river, and he eased himself carefully over the rocks, feeling for the first rung with his foot. Lena watched as he sank out of sight, little by little. After a few moments, his voice called up from below. "I'm down! Now you come!" Lena inched backward just as Dune had, letting one foot dangle over the edge, lower and lower, until it touched the first rung of the ladder. She shifted her weight to that foot, clinging with cold fingers to a ridge in the rock, and lowered herself slowly until she was standing on the rung with both feet. Her heart was beating so hard she was afraid it would shake her fingers loose from their grip. Now she had to move downward. She felt for the next rung with her foot, found it, and let herself down. It would have been easy if it hadn't been for the river waiting below to swallow her. "You're almost there," called Dune. His voice came from right below her. "There's a ledge. One more rung and you'll feel it." She did feel it, solid beneath her foot. For a second, she stood there, still clutching the ladder. The surging water was only inches below her now. "Don't think about it," she told herself. She moved sideways 2 steps to stand next to Dune, and there in front of them was a rectangular space carved out of the river wall, rather like the entry hall of a building. It was perhaps 8 feet wide and 8 feet high, and would have been invisible from anywhere else in the pipeworks. You had to have climbed down the riverbank to see it. They stepped into this entry hall and walked a few steps. Enough light to see by came from the tunnel behind them. Lena stopped. "There's a door," she said. "What?" said Dune. The water roared so loudly they had to shout to be heard. "The door!" yelled Lena happily. "Yes," Dune yelled back. "I see it." At the end of the passage was a wide, solid-looking door. It was dull gray, mottled with greenish and brownish blotches that looked like mildew. Lena put her palms against it. It was metal, and it felt cold. The door had a metal handle, and just below the handle was a keyhole. Lena reached into the pocket of her pants for her copy of the instructions. She unfolded it, and June looked over her shoulder. Together they squinted at the paper in the dim light from the main tunnel. "This is the part right here," she said, pointing. And here's the part that they're looking at. I'll show you first before I read it. Number 3, ADDE down Iver ink to edge upper 8 low. Number 4, big space, axe to the water, find door of bow, space, cur, KE, space, hind, small steel pan, space, the right blank, rim, EY, open, DO, space. Lena ran her finger along line number 3. This must say something, something, down riverbank to ledge, approximately 8 feet below. That's what we've just done. Then 4 is something about backs to the water, find door, something, and then key hind. That must be key behind. And then there's the small steel pan. Do you see a small steel pan? June was still studying the paper. It says right. We should look to the right of the door. And quite easily, they found it. It wasn't a pan at all, but a small square of steel embedded in the wall. "A steel panel," said Lena. She ran her fingers across it and felt a dent at one side. When she pressed there, the panel sprang open easily and silently as if it were glad to have been finally found. Inside, a silver key was hanging on a hook. All right, you guessed it. I'm going to stop here for today. Leave you in suspense and wanting more. So we'll continue on and find out if the key goes to this door or what it is. See you next time.